welcome back to our channel. My name's Natalie.
I'm Erika. We're gonna wing this, girls.
Yeah, it is what it is. We both just worked a full day of work and trying to videotape this, so you get what you get. Okay, so disclaimer always with our channel is that we talk a lot about some pretty gruesome cases. This one is probably the most gruesome case I've ever researched or heard about. So just a disclaimer, if that's a trigger for you, I would not watch this one. Another thing is that we're going to be drinking a lot during this.
Since our case is in Tennessee, we decided to do Jack and Coke.
Yes,
Cheers.
So cheers. Another disclaimer is if you see us drinking or laughing or dancing, that's not because we're making light of the case or taking anything away from how gruesome this case is. It's just that we would actually go insane if we don't bring some light into this.
We're not making fun of the victims at all.
By no means. And that's the only way we could get through this case, and I do think it is important that we talk about this case because it didn't get a lot of coverage. It didn't hit national media, which surprises me a ton. So we do want to get the victim's story out there, but we want to do it in our own way, and that's, if you've been to our channel before, we laugh a lot, we drink a lot, and we like to talk about crime.
Okay, last disclaimer here, folks. The information provided by us in this video is for educational purposes. All information in this video is provided in good faith. The views expressed are our own personal opinions, and the details we provide are all alleged, and individuals are innocent until proven guilty in the court of law.
If you're new to the channel, Erika and I, once a week, we talk about a true crime case. So we'll switch off who talks about it. So this week I'm talking about it, and we try to pick a case that somehow we feel strongly about, touched us in some way, we have some connection to, something of that nature, and one that maybe the other one doesn't know that much about. So we try to educate them and hopefully educate you guys along the way as well. With that being said, if you are a mama and you've got kids in the room, I would put your headphones on, get that glass of wine, snuggle up on the couch, and buckle up, Buttercup, because this one is a doozy. Today we're going to talk about the Channon Christian and Chris Newsom case. So if you haven't heard about this case, again, it is extremely, extremely gruesome. That's why we brought out the hard stuff with the whiskey tonight.
Had to.
Again, the reason that I chose this case is because there's a lot of connections that I have to this case. For instance, this happened in Knoxville, Tennessee. I lived there for 4 years. Channon was actually a student at the University of Tennessee. That's where I went to college. There's a few other connections that I'll go through as we go through the case, but it really just stuck out to me because one, of those connections, but two, because it didn't get a lot of media coverage. There are certain things along with this case, and we're not going to talk about it, but there are some racial components to this case. If you've seen other people cover it, I don't believe it was racially motivated by any means. I think it was a crime of opportunity. So we're not going to talk about that piece, but no, if you ever do research this case, that is a huge component. But again, I don't think that's why these young 20-year-olds were targeted. I think it was just a crime of opportunity, and unfortunately they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. So Channon Gail Christian was born on April 29th, 1985. She was actually born in Texas, but her and her family moved to Tennessee when she was in her young teens, so around 13 years old. So she has a brother named Chase, and then her parents are Dina and Gary Christian. And so she comes from a very tight-knit family. I would refer to them as upper middle class. They lived in West Knoxville, specifically in a town called Farragut. And there's a saying in Knoxville, it's West Knoxville and then the rest of Knoxville. And so West Knoxville is where, you've got lots of money comes out of West Knoxville, and this is where her family lived. She did go to Farragut High School, and after she graduated from high school, she went to the University of Tennessee. However, she did decide to stay and live with her parents to save money. And she did also work 2 jobs during this time. So very hard worker. Her parents would describe her as never meeting a stranger. She loved to play golf, actually.
Interesting.
So, yeah, her brother and her dad were really big into golf. And she had to tag along with them a few times on the golf course. And finally she was like, I'm tired of watching, I want to play. Right. And she ended up being pretty good. And so that's how she got into it.
Not happened to me. My dad really wanted me to get into golf. He bought me clubs when I was 5, like the mini clubs. I could never get the balls off the ground. Every time. I still can't.
My dad, we don't have that problem because I have 4 brothers, so my dad had plenty of people to go through, but My dad loved golf too. Our dads actually went to Scotland on a golf trip together. One time.
They planned that.
Didn't take
without us.
Did not take us. Okay. Wow, we digress. Channon was a senior at the University of Tennessee. She was majoring in sociology. And again, she went to school at Farragut High School, then went to the University of Tennessee, which was just a few miles down the road. So she did go to school with a lot of her friends from high school, but she did branch out and meet other, new groups of people, which you do in college. And so this is actually how she got to meet Chris. And his full name is Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr.
That's a mouthful.
I know. So we're just going to call him Chris. He was named after his dad. He was born on September 21st of 1983, and he was born and raised in Knoxville. His parents are Hugh and Mary Newsom, and he has quite a few siblings. So he has a brother and 2 sisters. Chris was very active, so he loved doing anything outdoors. So he loved playing golf. That's him and Channon had that connection. He loved to fish. He played baseball all of his life. They actually still, to this day, hold a baseball tournament in his honor, and all the proceeds go to a scholarship fund. Overall, just described as being fun and caring, and just a good old boy from Tennessee.
Not my type at all.
After high school, Chris went to Pellissippi Community College, which is a local college, community college in Knoxville, Tennessee. After that, he decided to become a carpenter. So in November of 2006, this is when Chris and Channon actually get set up by mutual friends. So they go on their first date and they just instantly hit it off. So it's been reported by both families that they were both extremely infatuated, and Chris actually told his parents that he was in love with Channon, and Shannon's parents said that they think that she felt the same way about him, even though it wasn't verbalized to them.
That's so sweet.
Yeah. So then fast forward to January of 2007. So this is only 2 months later. They are about to go on a date. Well, they're going to meet up and go to a party. So Chris was playing golf with his best friend that day. So Channon decided to go get ready at her best friend's house. So her and her best friend Kara are getting ready at the Washington Ridge Apartments, and Channon gets a call from Chris. And he says, "Hey, I'm running a little bit late, but I'll be there, and I'll come to pick you up, and we'll go to the party." So Channon, her and Kara were talking, and she was like, "Kara, just go ahead without me, because it might be a while till he's here." We have all waited on men. I swear to God, they take longer than, at least my husband takes longer than I do to get ready.
My husband, he waits until I'm ready, and then he goes and decides to do what he needs to do. It's so annoying.
So annoying.
Like, let's work with time management a little bit better, men.
So Kara, at around 8 o'clock, she leaves and goes to the party. Around 9:15, so an hour and a half later, Chris he rolls into the Washington Ridge Apartments. Channon was already downstairs in her car. They were probably just running a little bit late, so she wanted to make sure that they got there pretty quickly. But when Chris pulled up, it was either they were a new, young couple in love and they started making out, or if it was one of those, like, Chris trying to, like, kiss her and put her in a good mood because she's mad that he's so late.
Took it forever.
Yeah. So, whatever, these two were canoodling in the car and were distracted. These two were canoodling in the car and were distracted. At this exact same time, this is when 3 men in a car pull up into the Washington Ridge Apartments. And those 3 men are, and if I say these names wrong, I apologize. We're going to use their last names moving forward, because I 100% can guarantee you that I will mess their names up, especially when some more whiskey gets in my gullet. So these 3 men were LaMarcus Davidson, Latavius Cobbins, and Eric Boyd.
No, you said them right.
Moving forward, I'm going to use their last names because I will mess up their first names.
I'll try to keep her in check, though.
Thank you.
I know.
I do want to dig into these 3 for just a second and give you a little bit of background on them. So we're going to start with LaMarcus Davidson. And again, I'm going to refer to him as Davidson moving forward. So he is what's considered the ringleader in this group. His nickname is Slim, which I'm like,
is he?
No, he's not. I'm not here for
Go back.
Yeah.
Go back.
He's not. Like, he's not.
Honey, maybe that's a name that he was just like,
Yeah.
That's something I need to look forward to. That's gonna get me motivated. I'm not slim now, but I might be.
Maybe we shouldn't have gone with whiskey. Anyway, so Davidson was born in June of 1981, so this made him 25 at the time of the murders. He was actually born in Memphis, but was very well known in the Knoxville area, so he had gotten in trouble a lot and was a drug dealer. And he was born to his mother, who suffered from substance abuse and worked as a sex worker. His sister referred to her mother as basically flip-flopping between beating them and abandoning them. So he grew up in a very sad home. Does not give him any justification for why he did this, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on that. Because he grew up in a chaotic home, it's not surprising that he also himself dealt with substance abuse, and from a very young age, he started committing crimes. In 1999, he was actually sentenced to 5 years in prison for carjacking and aggravated robbery. He was released in August of 2006, which was only 5 months.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, that's what? How many months?
5 months before these murders that we're talking about.
So you literally get out and you're like, let's do this.
Yeah, and again, he was arrested for carjacking and aggravated robbery. And 5 months later, he does it again, except takes it to a completely different level.
Yeah.
So the next person I want to talk about is Cobbins. He is actually the half-brother of Davidson, and so that's their connection. They didn't grow up together, though, but they had very similar upbringings. They were both very chaotic, and I would deem sad. So he was born on September 1985, and his actual early childhood wasn't bad. So it was actually filled with a lot of stability, a lot of love. He lived with his aunt, but unfortunately in his early teens, she died. And that is just kind of where shit hits the fan for Cobbins. Right. So after she died, he actually became homeless, and he was stuck switching between his mom, who suffered from substance abuse and who was also a sex worker, and then his dad, who was an alcoholic and a raging alcoholic. So his childhood was just riddled with abuse, neglect, substance abuse of his own, homelessness. He actually had a brain injury. Wow. Yeah, so it was just extremely chaotic. He also got in trouble in his youth. So in 2003, he was convicted of third-degree attempted robbery in New York. And so you'll see as we go through each suspect in this case, a lot of them had previous convictions, especially convictions that involved violence of some sort. And so then in December of 2006, he got his friend George Thomas and his girlfriend Vanessa Coleman, and they got in a car and they drove down to Tennessee to come live with, or to come visit / live with Davidson. So George Thomas and Vanessa Coleman play a huge role in this crime, but we'll get to them a little bit later because they were not in the car that rolled into the Washington
Keep those names in your back pocket. They will come back.
They will. So then our next suspect, or the third person that was in the car with them, is Eric Boyd, and he was born in 1972. So he's by far the oldest of all of the three men that were in the car. And his childhood, he started becoming a criminal very, very young and just never stopped. So in 1999, he actually went on this robbing spree. He does eventually get caught, and he does get sentenced to prison, and this is where he meets LaMarcus Davidson, and they become friends in prison. So that's their connection. Okay, so we're gonna chug the last bit of this before we get to this next part, because it is very, very gruesome, and I need a new drink before we get into it. Okay, and we're back.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Woo! College.
Put some hair on your chest. So this is the part that we're going to get into the details of what actually happened to Channon and Chris. Now, the details of this case that I'm about to share, they come from a variety of different sources. Police reports, the autopsy reports, different documentaries, the actual trial transcripts, the actual video of some of the suspects' testimony at trial. With that being said, a lot of it, though, does come from the suspects. So the only people who really knew what went on there are the suspects and Channon and Chris, and unfortunately they're not here to share their side of the story. To the best of our knowledge, the details that we're going to share is what happened, and I'll tell you at some points what the suspect said and then what the police actually think happened, because there are some differing. But just so you know, it comes from a lot of different sources and it is going to get detailed. So if you've heard something different, it's because no one knows exactly what went on, because there weren't very many eyewitnesses by any means. There was no surveillance, nothing of that nature. We're going to go into what happened that terrible weekend. So, like chug before.
Chug, 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 chug. We're back in college. Chug, 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 chug. We're back in college.
So, again, it was January 6, 2007. Chris and Channon are making out in their car. And at this point, the three men, so Davidson, Coppins, and Boyd, roll up in their car. They said that they were going to the Washington Ridge apartments because Davidson owed a woman money for furniture that he had bought from her. And so he was going to go repay that. However, I don't believe that for a second. I think that they were looking for someone to carjack. They were poor. A lot of them were homeless. A lot of them dealt with substance abuse. And I think that they were looking for an easy way out.
Do you think that they were there to do something to that woman? Like, their intention was not to pay that woman, probably because they didn't have that money.
Yeah.
I agree. Their intent was not to go pay that woman.
Yes,
But if they didn't happen to see Channon and Chris, would it have been this woman?
I don't know, possibly. So these three are in the Washington Ridge apartment, and they're just circling, and they're actually going around, and during this time that they're circling the parking lot, they are smoking a wet blunt, which is marijuana that is drenched in embalming fluid. So, like, what the fuck is wrong with our youth? But Chris and Channon were making out in Shannon's 4Runner. So Chris was standing outside and Channon was sitting in the driver's seat. And these three come up, park right next to them. They put a gun to Chris's head, to the back of Chris's head, and push them both into Shannon's 4Runner. So they push them into the back seat, they blindfold them, and they bound their hands, and then they drive to 2316 Shipman Street. So this is where Davidson lived, and this is where Cobbins, his half-brother, George Thomas, which was Cobbins' friend, and then Vanessa Coleman, which was Cobbins' girlfriend, where they were all staying. They bring Channon and Chris into the house. Now, there's different versions of this. So it's really unknown whether Chris ever made it into the house or not, but for intents and purposes, I believe he did, just because of what I'm about to tell you. I don't think that could have taken place out in public and no one noticed. So these three men lead Chris and Channon into the house. Both Chris and Channon are blindfolded and their hands are bound. So George and Vanessa have to know that something's up. So we're going to talk first about what happened to Chris, and then we'll go to Channon. Sometime between 11:45 and 12:45, Chris was raped, and raped very violently. There were lacerations, bruising, hairs all around his anus. So very, very, very violent. And there was semen found on his body, but they weren't able to get any DNA from it. Drink. So then, sometime around 1:30, all of the men, so Thomas, Davidson, Boyd, and Cobbins, they all leave and they take Chris. And they drive him to a set of railroad tracks. They take his shoes off, make him walk barefoot. At this point, he is naked from the waist down. And he's still bound. His hands are still bound. He still has a blindfold on him. They take Chris's sock, they put him in his mouth to gag him, and then tie a shoelace around his head to secure it. They then take him to the side of the railroad tracks, and they shoot him once, and it goes in the back of his neck. They then shoot him again, and it goes in his lower back. It's believed that Chris was paralyzed at this point, but very much still alive. So he's now down on his knees. One of the men goes and they take the gun and they put it to the back of his head, execution style, and pull the trigger. And this would be the fatal shot. And I want it to be known that he was dead at this point, because what they do next would be absolutely horrible. Even more horrible. It's terrible, but even more horrible if he were alive. So after they shot him in the back of the head, execution style, they wrap his body in a comforter. They pour it with gasoline, and then they light it on fire. This is why they were unable to determine the semen, was left on Chris.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
See?
Drink break.
Okay, so that was Chris's hell. And not to take anything away from what he went through, but I do want to point out that his ordeal lasted about 4.5 hours, and Shannon's lasted anywhere from 12 to 36 hours. And we're going to get into the details of hers now. So again, going back to 9/15, they were abducted from the Washington Ridge apartments. From there, she is taken to Chipman Street, where she is blindfolded and her hands are bound. She's taken into the house, and she's immediately taken into Davidson's bedroom. In there, they tie her down, so her hands are bound above her head and her legs are tied down as well. And this is where she will be beaten, tortured, raped, sodomized for hours. So again, I did read the autopsy report of this, and it was extremely gruesome. I will tell you a few things just because I need you to know how horrible these people are that did this to her. At one point, she was tied to a chair with her arms behind her and her legs tied to the chairs, or to the legs of the chair. And Cobbins forced her to have oral sex. So it was so forceful that the part that connects your lip to your gums was torn. And Cobbins said that she did this voluntarily, gave him a blowjob voluntarily.
After you're bound and,
he is the
bound and
biggest
tortured.
piece of shit. His story just falls apart in so many ways.
Stupid.
Yeah. Again, the medical examiner said that she was raped repeatedly, tortured repeatedly, and she specifically said that it wasn't your typical rape, that it was way too violent it have not been by something else besides just a vaginal rape with a penis. So, meaning she was
Other
sodomized
stuff.
with different objects repeatedly. She was also kicked violently over and over again in her genital areas. So there was bruising, lacerations, tearing. So again, she was raped, and this is to quote the medical examiner, in every way you could possibly think of. And just to let it be known, they believe that it was Vanessa Coleman who kicked her repeatedly
I'd believe it.
in her vaginal area, and my guess would be because she gave Cobbins a blowjob, but just repeatedly and causing her to hemorrhage terribly.
I don't understand how you go from aggravated carjacking to this.
Just being terrible, terrible people.
The two that met in prison, it was like fire and ice.
Yeah.
You wonder if they hadn't met and then you didn't have the other suspect, would this all have happened?
Okay, so her entire body is covered in bruises from head to toe. She has rug burns all over her body. And again, this lasted for
Days.
Yes, days. Now, it's unclear exactly when she died because medical examiners can't determine it. But they said it was anywhere from the afternoon of January 7th to the afternoon of January 8th. And remember, she was abducted on January 6th. One thing that is important is at 12:33 on the morning of January 7th, so not very long after she was abducted, they made her call her dad. I'm going to say that now, but it becomes very significant later on. Somewhere towards the end of this awful ordeal, she was drugged into the living room of Davidson's house, and Davidson reportedly choked her out, okay? Presumably to try to kill her, but she didn't die. And he reportedly said, and I quote in his testimony, was, "This bitch just didn't want to die." While she is still alive, in order to cover up the physical evidence, they pour bleach all over her body and start scrubbing her. And mind you, her body is covered in lacerations, cuts, rug burns, all of these things, bruises. So this is extremely painful, scrubbing her down, and then they pour it down her throat. They do all of this, and then, if that's not enough, they hog tie her. They tie a white plastic bag around her neck and tie it tight.
Suffocate her. Yeah.
She was then placed, her entire body was placed in a big black trash bag, and then they stuck her in a trash can that I'm about to show you. And in order to get her body in the trash can, they had to force her in there, and she was in this god-awful squish position. And mind you, she's alive, when all of this happens. Between the plastic bag over her head and the position that she was forced into, she did suffocate, but it was a very, very slow suffocation. So medical examiners estimate that it would have taken her 30 minutes at this point to suffocate to death. And she died with her eyes open, which I think is just she was fighting, so like she wanted to live.
Yeah, she
so
fought
bad.
so hard.
Yeah, she did. So it was a very, very
awful
slow
way
process.
to die.
Again, that's why I'm saying this crime is probably the most gruesome crime that I've ever researched, at least. With that being said, drink break. I need a drink after that. Glad this thing's strong. Now to my personal favorite part is how these horrible monsters get caught. So, again, remember Chris and Channon, they were supposed to meet their friends at this party. But when they didn't show up, they were starting to get concerned. They start calling them and texting them. So their friends are calling and texting them. They don't get any response. This is really abnormal from Channon and Chris. So they start to get really concerned. So then at 11 o'clock at night, two of Chris's friends get in a car and they drive over to the Washington Ridge apartments. And there they see that Chris's truck is still there, but Shannon's 4Runner is gone. So they're like, okay, maybe these two just decided to
go somewhere else together.
They're young, like maybe they're trying to get some alone time. But then when Channon didn't come to work or show up to work, that's when all of the alarms went off.
Right.
So on January 7th, she was supposed to show up to work and she didn't come. And this is where it got very concerning. And so Shannon's mom actually got on the phone and called Mary, which is Chris's mom. They start calling all their friends. They start calling, once they realized their friends didn't know where they were, they start calling hospitals. They started calling jails, morgues. They did all of this. And so finally they were like, no, we're gonna file a police report. So the afternoon of January 7th, they go and file a police report. So the police didn't take them seriously. The police basically told them, you have to start your own search. And so what do these families do?
They're like,
they get
okay.
a group of
challenge
people.
accepted.
Yeah, and they start searching. But while they were filing a police report and doing all that, Shannon's dad was like, okay, the police told me I have to take it in my own hands. I'm going to do that. So he immediately calls the cell phone company and was like, can you tell me, like, my daughter's missing, can you tell me where her phone last pinged?
And
this is
from
where
the
that
cell phone towers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This is where that phone call that they made Channon make at 12:33 a.m. in the morning comes into play. The cell phone company tells Shannon's dad that it last pinged off of Cherry Street.
Okay.
And so I'm going to show you a map here that tells you how close all of this is. So Shannon's family, Chris's family, and a huge group of all of their friends, they get together and they go down to Cherry Street, which is quite a very, you just don't want to be there at night. So this is on the night of the 7th, but they all get in and they start this massive search. After a few hours, so at around 2 a.m. this is now the morning of January 8th, Shannon's dad located her car. It's on the corner of Chipman and Glider Street, and so if you're looking at the map, this is very close to where
it's a couple
Chris's
blocks.
body was found, and yeah, Shannon's body will eventually be found. And I do want to actually back up. So when Chris and Shannon's family tried to put in the police report, and they didn't take them seriously, Chris's body had already been found.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but
I didn't know that.
No, yeah, but it was burnt so horribly that they didn't identify him. But if police would have taken him seriously, taken the report, they would have known that it was at least a young male's body had been found. If they would have looked at the cell tower, and that would have taken them to the Cherry Street cell tower, it was so close to where Chris's body was found.
And where Shannon's body.
Channon was still alive at this point. So they could have potentially found her. That's what makes me so mad. After Shannon's dad finds her car, the police still didn't take them seriously. And they investigated it as an abandoned vehicle. And again, it's not sure whether she was alive at this point, but she could have been. The only good thing I can say that they did do is they did process the car. I'm going to put the map back up here. If you can see it, you can see that her car was only a block and a half from where she was being... Oh, sorry.
From where her body was found.
From where her body was found. So where she was being held at the time that the car was found.
So Her body, is it a trash can, like, outside of the house?
No, it's in the kitchen.
Okay, so because that wasn't explained. It was just in a trash can. So she's actually in the kitchen this whole time.
Yeah, she's in the kitchen of the house. Yes, good point. On Shipman Street. So, again, once the car is found, police don't take it seriously as a missing persons case still. It's just an abandoned vehicle. But they do process the car, which is good because they do find an envelope that has a fingerprint on it. So they do analyze this envelope that has a fingerprint, or they analyze the fingerprint that's on this envelope, and it comes back as belonging to Davidson. But it's interesting to me of some of the things that they tried to hide for like evidence, and then others that they just completely missed. There's just no logic to what they did.
But to your point, like they took meticulous efforts to hide the bodies, but were stupid.
It's almost not to hide the bodies, it's to hide the evidence on the bodies.
True.
Okay, so once they find out that the fingerprint came back to Davidson, they do go to Chipman Street because they find that that's where Davidson is residing, and that's where they found Shannon's body. So this happened on the 9th. So this is 3 days after the abduction, and that's where everything goes into a massive manhunt for these people. Yeah. So on January 11th, Davidson is arrested in a vacant home where he was hiding out, and Eric Boyd was the one who was hiding him.
They just found a random house to hide in?
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know those, we'll just find a random house to hide in.
Yep.
The whiskey is hit. I'm sorry.
Sorry, when Davidson was arrested, he was arrested with Chris's tennis shoes.
Fucking idiot.
Yeah. From there, police fly to Kentucky, and this is where they arrest Cobbins, and this is where they arrest Thomas. So then on 131, Vanessa Coleman is arrested, and they find Shannon's wallet, they find her perfume and her makeup, and Vanessa's purse.
You are a sad human being.
I'm not going to go through all the details of the trial just because there are 5 different trials for every single one, and that would take 5 hours, and we're already getting a little tipsy here. So these are the monsters responsible for the horrible murders of these 2 young adults.
He looks like Eddie Murphy. Tell me I'm wrong.
Maybe a younger one, but...
He looks like Eddie Murphy circa SNL. Getting hot in the hot tub. Eddie Murphy.
Maybe. I don't know.
Fish. Hold on. Can't tell me. That does not look similar.
He does look similar. He does look
You
similar.
cannot tell me that is not Eddie Murphy.
He does look really similar. Okay, fair. Fair.
Now that's covered.
So, yeah, no, we're past that. These are the monsters responsible for these horrible murders. They go to trial in 2008 and 2009. So, Eric Boyd is the first one to go to trial, and at this point, he's the only one that's not charged with murder. So, he was found guilty of being an accessory to a fatal carjacking and failing to report the location of a known fugitive, which was Davidson.
But wasn't he helping get rid of Chris's body?
Oh, yeah, but they couldn't prove it. And so he was convicted on April 6th of 2008, and he was found guilty and sentenced to the maximum, which for his crimes was only 18 years in federal prison. So then we have Cobbins. He was charged with 46 different charges stemming from aggravated kidnapping, rape, felony, carjacking, disposal of body, so a lot of different counts. He was convicted on August 25th of 2009, and then the jury unanimously found him guilty, and then the next day, only after a few hours, they decided to sentence him to life in prison without parole. So they did spare his life. So then the next person that we have is Davidson. Davidson was charged with the same 46 counts that his half-brother was charged with, so that Cobbins was charged with. His conviction date was October 28th of 2009. He was found guilty of 43 of the original charges. And then on October 30th, again, really quickly, the same jury that convicted him sentenced him to death for these crimes. Okay, so then we have George Thomas. He was charged on the same 46 charges that Davidson and Cobbins have. And one thing that I found very interesting about this is he was found guilty on all of the charges, but there was no physical evidence against him in this case. It was mainly against Cobbins and Davidson, so it was all circumstantial and hearsay from the other suspects. But he got found guilty on all charges, and the other ones didn't. 2 days after his conviction, he was also sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So then we have Vanessa Coleman. She is the one that bothers me the most. There are multiple opportunities where she was the only one in the house with Channon, so when the boys were murdering Chris, she could have let her go.
Yes.
She could have let her go and just peaced out. So she was the last one to go to trial. It's a little more complicated because in exchange for her testimony against the other people, she was granted immunity by the feds. However, the state courts determined that the federal grant of immunity would not be allowed to extend to the state charges of murder or rape. So she wasn't charged federally, but the state came in and charged her, which...
Gotcha.
Go Tennessee.
Gotcha.
So she was then convicted on May 13th of 2010. She was acquitted of first-degree murder, but she was found guilty of lesser charges. So she ended up being sentenced to 53 years behind bars.
Not enough.
No, 100% not enough. So the thing that gets me the most is her journal entry after the crimes. And I'm going to put it on the screen and read it to you. And it says, "Last night was one of a kind. We stayed with a crackhead that is cool as hell. It snowed a little bit, but it's already melted. Let's talk about adventures, ! I had one hell of an adventure since I've been in the Big T-Inn, so Tennessee. It's a crazy world these days, but I love the fun adventures and lessons that I've learned. It's going to be a long, interesting year."
No.
What's wrong with these people?
What is wrong with you?
You need Jesus.
You do need Jesus.
So, just to recap what happened. George Thomas,
Guilty.
Life without parole. Cobbins, guilty. Life without parole. Davidson, guilty. And sentenced to death. Eric Boyd, guilty. 18 years. Yep. And then Vanessa Coleman, guilty. And she is sentenced to 53 years. So, all suspects are found guilty. The families finally found justice. But, no, Margot, this is not where this story ends. So then, in March of 2010, the judge who presided over 4 of the 5 cases for these suspects pled guilty because of all this evidence that came up that he was taking prescription pills while rendering verdicts. And so while sitting on the bench, he got these pills from defendants that were being tried in his court. And he took sexual favors from people that were showing up in his court for lesser sin. Judge Baumgardner in March of 2020 got convicted. So then, because of this,
they had to retry.
In December of 2010, Judge Blackwood, he granted retrials to Davidson, Thomas, Cobbins, and Coleman. May of 2011, the Tennessee Supreme Court, though, overruled that for Thomas, Cobbins, and Davidson. Coleman, though, was granted a new trial because it was on video that Judge Baumgardner was slurring his words while he was actually reading her sentencing. There's a lot of back and forth for quite a few years between the Supreme Court and Blackwood, going back and forth on whether Thomas, Cobbins, and Davidson should have gotten retrials. So I'm not going to go through all of that. Long story short, Coleman and Thomas are the only ones who got retrials. In November of 2012, Coleman went back on trial and was convicted of aggravated kidnapping, facilitation of rape, and facilitation of murder of Channon, but not of Chris, because again, it's believed that she was at the house when Chris was murdered, when the boys murdered him. And so she was then sentenced to 35 years. Originally, it was 53. She did try in 2014 to get a new trial, but this was denied to her. So she is still in prison. So then, May of 2013, Thomas went back on trial, and he was convicted of all counts. So he was sentenced to 2 life prisons and 25 years for the rapes. But he does have a possibility of parole after 51 years. And originally, he was life in prison without the possibility of parole. Okay, but I think the craziest thing of all of this is that in 2017, Eric Boyd, remember the guy who was only charged with
18 years.
Yeah, exactly, for carjacking and for hiding Davidson after the fact. He was charged with rape, murder, robbery, and kidnapping. So the state came in. So originally he had federal charges, and then 11 years
state
after,
came back and was like,
the state came in and was like,
never mind, we're going to get you for this.
Yes, and charged him. So this was a humongous deal. In August of 2019, Boyd is finally found guilty of almost all the charges that he was charged with, and the judge right then immediately sentenced him to life in prison. So he went from 18 years, which he would have gotten out in 2022, to life in prison. This is originally what they were sentenced with. But then, after the retrials, there were some changes. So George Thomas,
guilty!
He was now life with
Possibility
of parole in 51 years. So we have Cobbins,
Guilty!
Life without parole. Davidson,
Guilty!
Sentenced to death and is still on death row. Then we have Boyd,
Guilty!
Went from 18 years to life in prison without parole. And then finally, Vanessa Coleman,
Guilty!
She originally had 53 years and then went down to 35 years.
Super duper bitch.
Let's take a drink for getting through that. But that was the case of Channon Christian and Chris Newsom. It was extremely terrible. These families, what they've gone through, having to sit through trial and retrial and just going to court for so many years.
Yeah.
If you look at interviews of her dad, just the anger that pours out of him, he's finally come to some sort of terms with it, and maybe has found some peace, but you can tell that it's just destroyed both of these families. It took a toll on the community, and so again, just a completely senseless crime. They wanted money. They could have stolen her car and done nothing to them, but they chose to be complete monsters.
Yeah,
and
there's no other way to describe it. Monsters.
Horrible, horrible crimes. With that being said, that's the case. Thank God we're done with it.
Thank you for listening. Please comment down below. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you liked what you saw and heard. If you have any comments of any cases that kind of register with you or any kind of cases that you feel that we should cover, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. But next week, your girl is going to be coming at you with a new case. I hope you guys dig it. With that being said, be a bitch and stay alive.
Cheers!
Cheers!
Oh my God, we're like 2 seconds into this and we've already fucked up.
They're going to come after us for a lot, but... Because I'm fabulous. We're only on the second slide.
There's 50. What the fuck?
We're going to be here all night. Falling apart.
Bumblefuck. This is going to be so much fucking editing. Fuck off!
I just need to sit down, look pretty, and drink.
Let's try that again. We got this.
Fuck.
Chris, this
you
case
fucked this up.
Lols.